I'm Doc Pelzel, and I was general manager of KALX for several years, and I was music director for about 8 years before that. And came to KFJC in 1980 to be a station supervisor there. Work on a lot of development of the station in many areas. And one of them was Louie Louie, which seemed like a significant project that would put our name in lights, and certainly has resulted in a lot of lights. Louie Louie started at KFJC when Stretch Riedle decided to string together all the versions that he had of a song that he thought was relatively easy.
Back in 1981, I was doing a graveyard show, and I decided to carve something different, and that was all the versions of one song I could come up with. And I went through my record collection at home and realized that Louie Louie was the one I had most versions of. So I scraped together 33 versions of that.
And about the same time he was doing that, a non-commercial station in Berkeley, KALX, at the University of California, was conducting a several-month-long poll of its listenership as to what was their favorite all-time rock and roll song.
The whole thing started when Doc, who used to be our station manager, moved over to KFJC, and he knew the kind of shows I did, a lot of conceptual things. And he came up to me one afternoon when he was visiting us, and he said that he had some DJs who were on in the middle of the night, like 3 in the morning, and every week they would take a different rock and roll classic, and they would play every version they could find. And he said these guys were really serious about collecting all these versions of these classic rock and roll songs. And he said when they got to Louie Louie, they had over 30 versions, and everybody went, wow, 30 versions sounded like an incredible amount of versions to be on record. And so I said, well, listen, if you can get me the tapes of the versions we don't have here, I'll do it on my show. And I'll also have a thing where a month in advance, I'll invite the listeners to send in their versions of Louie Louie, and we'll see how many we can get.
Alex extended the marathon from 88 up to 200 and went on at 6 o'clock at night and ran 200 versions, lasting 12 hours until 6 o'clock in the morning. They were so snowed under with the people bringing in versions, even though the deadline had passed, bringing it in during the broadcast itself, that they had to turn down a request by Entertainment Tonight to allow the camera crews to come in and film them. I think that was probably about all Cowlitz wanted to do.
They came up with 12 hours of Louie Louie and 200 versions. Well, at that point, we realized this is going to go on forever unless we really decide to do it right the next time. So in February, we started promotions, and we started a whole concept of selling Louie Louie and coming up with the maximum Louie Louie special.
We were sitting in Doc's office on campus, Doc Pelzel, and I was sort of running off at the imagination about all of the different things that could happen, like, well, gee, we could get the guy that wrote the song up here, we could have live bands playing all day long, a band every hour, we could broadcast on satellite, we could go for a week, there was just this endless imagination flowing, sort of.
What happened to KFJC after the event was over? We got a lot of write-ups in places that we hadn't expected. Brief mentions in things like Adweek and Playboy magazine and the Wall Street Journal, and again, various other publications that we wouldn't have expected KFJC's event to be mentioned. Sometimes they didn't mention the station call letters. They just mentioned like a station in Los Altos Hills or a non-commercial station. Sometimes they didn't use the call letters. I imagine there were probably some foreign news stories that we weren't aware of that happened too, and I wish we could have tracked those down. But I guess the main thing was that we received a lot of notoriety and fame around and during the marathon. Phil Dirt and others were interviewed on KGO and on other stations, get the TV station coverage, a lot of newspaper coverage. We were in the Chronicle several times, and the Mercury News and Metro and other papers of that ilk that were able to do something local. We were an AP Wire story, so again, that got us all across the country. So newspapers I don't even know featured Louie Louie coverage. Luckily, it was a slow news day, so we didn't get crowded out by an assassination or something.
Did it help the fame of the radio station in terms of doing other projects after that?
I suppose, although it's real hard to measure that. You know what I mean? The enrollment didn't all of a sudden, shoot way up or way down for that matter. And it was just looked at sort of as, it wasn't like winning the World Series or something. It was more like, hey, we did this event. It was real successful, and it was good for our image in that instance, I think, and good for the awareness in the community of what the station is. Because even decades later, people would say, oh yeah, you're the station that did that Louie Louie marathon. So and even in Radio and Records, they mentioned on the 20th anniversary when they were looking in their historical things in music, they mentioned the Louie Louie marathon from 1983. So it did give us sort of a little footnote in history, I guess, if you want to look at it that way.